So tonight we are talking about surrender, which I've come to realize is a little bit of a touchy subject for some people. I know it was for me for a really long time. And so I guess that's why I'm talking on it tonight. Um, One of the biggest things that I wanted to go over. Hey, Ashlyn, how are you doing? I'm glad that you're here. One of the biggest things that I wanted to go over tonight was the fact that surrendering is not submission. You are not submitting to any circumstance, to any outside forces. Surrender is really about tapping into your inner self, your higher self, and tapping into the flow of the universe, the flow of the energy that serves your highest good. So this is not about surrendering in any way that is giving up your power. And it's also not accepting defeat. A lot of times we see people who come to surrender after they've struggled and they fought and they just can't do it anymore. And so they surrender as in a giving up. I'm defeated. Whatever happens, I'm just accepting it. And that's really not what the energy of surrender is. So when you look at it from that perspective, from the negative connotations of giving up and submission and just kind of just taking whatever comes your way, surrender isn't that cool. I don't want that surrender. So this surrender that I'm talking about is different. It's more of a divine allowing. So this is not giving your power away. It's not allowing whatever situation you're in to consume you. It's not running away. It is not waiting for someone or something to come save you. And it is not losing control, which I know is also a big one for a lot of people. So, surrender also doesn't always have to be big. You can surrender in small ways. Just taking some conscious rest, like if you are tired and realize, hey, I need to take a break, conscious rest or slowing down is an act of surrendering. And this is all about tapping into your flow, tapping into your own energy, and surrendering to what it is that you need. So, say you are tired, you're fatigued, and you realize that, and you take a step back, you can say, okay, I'm going to surrender to this feeling. I'm going to clear a couple of things from my schedule, and I'm going to allow this to just take presence in my body, and I'm going to allow myself to rest in the way that I need. And then you're going to be able to come back even stronger because you took that time out for yourself. The act of surrendering is consciously choosing not to operate from a place of push or force or struggling or control. So this is not, well, surrendering is not losing or giving up your control in a sense. It's also not acting from a place of trying to control every situation. The example that came to mind is I have a 3-year-old, and he's very emotional and intense. So when something upsets him, his emotions just skyrocket all of a sudden. And so if I come to him and try to address it head on, calm down, this isn't whatever happened, like let's just talk about it, it makes him more flustered and upset. And so I've had to learn with him to surrender and allow him to experience this huge emotion that came up for him so strongly, even if it's over something very minute in my eyes. And so I have to surrender and just sit back and allow him to express himself. And then I can come to him and say, I hear you. I know you're upset. Let's look at this together and we'll create a solution. And so that's one of the ways that I've learned to surrender in my life. I'm sure you can find other examples of small surrender if you are paying attention. Also, the idea of being in a constant state of hustle or push in order to achieve success is one of the ideas that we've taken on from the patriarchy or colonialism, and this is something that is not our natural state. We naturally exist in a slower movement flow of allowing the cycles of life to guide us. And when a lot of the takeover was happening, all of the brutality that happened in our past, we lost a lot of those resources, a lot of those teachings, and we got out of touch with our synchronistic nature. So surrendering offers you the opportunity to get back into touch with that part of yourself a little bit more. And to also hear your inner guidance a little bit more. I also wrote down that releasing and forgiving can be an act of surrender. I've been doing a lot of forgiveness work, and this is sometimes some really big, hard things that I've had to experience in my life. But a lot of times it's very small, seemingly insignificant moments that I've realized that I had to forgive. And in the act of forgiveness, I'm literally releasing the energy of it from my body, from my energy body. So I no longer carry the weight of whatever the situation was, because I'm choosing to forgive it and surrender the energy and no longer carry it around. Receiving or asking for help can also be an act of surrendering. I was reminded about this in meditation today. So the way that I do my, the way that I clear and balance my energy is I usually ground, and then I invite source energy to come in. And today I was reminded of the act of consciously receiving the energy of source, the energy of love, and how there's a lot of times that I resist that. And so I've learned to open my heart, but it took me a long time to get to that place. So the act of receiving has been an act of surrendering for me, as well as asking for help. One of the biggest things that I have learned to do is to ask for help when I need it, because I'm one of the people who would try to do everything myself just so that I didn't become a burden to other people. And that's something that I learned I just couldn't maintain it all. There was too much in my life that I had taken responsibility for, and I couldn't hold it. So I had to start asking for help. And in the beginning, that was really hard for me, and it caused me a lot of struggle and just a lot of intense emotions. But eventually I learned that surrendering to my own energy and surrendering to what I was truly capable of meant that I had to ask for help. And so hopefully that makes sense for you. Another thing that I wrote down is I keep checking my notes just to make sure that I'm on track with everything. Consider surrendering to self, or to the version of reality that serves your highest good. And so when you feel into the act of surrendering to your truest self or your highest self, and just coming home into yourself, the act of surrendering to the reality that serves your highest good instead of the reality where your worries or fears or doubts come from. What does that feel like? And just hold the presence of that within your being and experience the release and the weight lift that comes along with that kind of surrendering. for me, that kind of surrendering feels easy and aligned. It feels like my natural state, like this is where I'm supposed to exist. I can take a deep breath. I don't have to hold my breath or feel anxious all of the time, because I know that I'm resilient and whatever comes my way, I can handle it. So existing in this state doesn't mean that everything's blissful or that our version of perfection is always present in every moment, but it does mean that we have this trust within ourselves that we can resiliently navigate and maneuver whatever situation comes our way, and then also that there's the possibility for really amazing things that we're opening ourselves up to. Um, Surrender allows us to shift perspective from the victim or martyr energies into a mentality that recognizes your power without the stigma of control. So when you tune into your power center, which is typically in your solar plexus, there's just this wealth. I see it as like just golden streaming energy, and it feels much different than any power that I've seen depicted in the modern world. I have seen small glimpses of it in other women or other leaders or people that I look up to, but within the terms power, a lot of times it has negative associations. So this kind of surrender accesses your divine power center, your creative abilities. This is also your ability to manifest. And this is not with the human control paradigms that we have operated in for so long. Then I wanted to go into why is it so hard for us to give up control? Almost every person that I have witnessed has had some form of control issues or a need for control, and it might show up in different areas of your life, and it might not always show up, but there's been times that you have struggled with the need to control or the disappointment that comes when you can't control something. So why is it so hard for us to give up control? If you watched my video yesterday, I talked about how the ego loves control, and the ego is ruled by the past. And this aspect of ourselves, it loves control because it really wants to just have insight into everything that's going to happen, because if it can plan the trajectory, then it can make sure that we are safe. And so it's going to plan out the smallest, safest course to make sure that we aren't hurt emotionally, physically, or anything else that could possibly happen to us. And I know when I really tuned into that, I didn't want to live that life anymore. I was ready to stop staying in the slow lane and get out of the box, and I didn't want to be there anymore. So ego loves control, and that's why we have such a hard time releasing it, because it is one of the ego's main prerogatives. We have this notion that letting go means we're handing it to something outside of ourselves. Like if we let go of control, then somebody else will have control over us, when this is really not the case. And we also think that control keeps everything in our life in order. So if we can control our schedule for the day, if we can control every single meal, if we can control everything within the household, which was my biggest struggle. I'm definitely a recovering control addict, and I found that I was trying to control so many things, and I was exerting so much energy that I was just left depleted and exhausted, and I came to a place where I could no longer function that way, and I had to learn surrender. And And in that surrender, I learned that what surrender really does is it puts a cage or a barrier around the possibilities of our life. So by controlling every single aspect of my life, I could only show up in a way where I gave so much of myself that I was completely depleted and exhausted, and I could not show up in any other way. I had no space in my life for fun. I had no space in my life to make new friendships or to enjoy what was actually present for me at that time. So that's one of the downfalls of control. And it also zaps our energy because we're so busy worrying about forcing things to go according to our plan. And if any small thing falls out of place, we have to overcorrect in order to get back on the plan. It just takes so much mental energy. It's exhausting. We also, um, when you're operating in this sort of control, it can show up as radical mood changes when something doesn't go as planned. I struggled a lot with anxiety when I was growing up, and so during this period, I was having intense anxiety. Um, at this point, I was really not even leaving the house very often. It was very rare that I would leave the house. And I had two small children at the time. And so my anxiety was to the point where I couldn't drive, I couldn't go to the store alone, and it was really debilitating in my life. Um, and I noticed when any small thing would fall out of order, I'd have increased anxiety or mood swings to the point where I would have to take a break or take a nap, or I couldn't show up for my family in the way that I really wanted to. And that was really hard for me to experience. Um, it can also look like getting angry or acting out when plans change suddenly, or when somebody behaves differently than we expect them to, which is a hard thing to look at. But a lot of people who really desire to have control in their life, it gets to a certain point when you're also trying to control other people in your life, which leads to codependency and all kinds of just not good stuff within relationships. So, um, getting angry when people don't act according to what you think they should. And it can also show up in smaller ways. And this can contribute to some of that rigid feelings or rigid routines. So it might look different for you every day or every week, but if you have a set schedule and you really just don't like to deter from the schedule, that can be a sign that you are experiencing the need to control right now, which is also, it's not something to judge, just something to observe. And the homework will go into a little bit of that observing tonight as well. So what control really boils down to is expectation. These could be expectations that you're putting on yourself, expectations that you're putting on how your day goes, or how the people around you act, or how a plan, like if you plan a trip, the expectation that every single stop on that trip happens exactly when you plan it, and not having any room to buffer or maneuver if something else happens. Um, so this expectation, it really ends up getting in the way, because if we have a very set expectation, how can we welcome in something that is better? So say, I don't know, if you're planning a road trip with your family and you really want to go see this big ball of yarn, and then you get there and they're closed, that you unexpectedly, and you had no idea they were closed, and so you're really disappointed. You get back in the car and then you see this giant fair, and that looks so much more fun. But because it wasn't on the plan, you don't want to go to it, and you don't make the extra detour in order to experience something that could have led to more enjoyment. Ashlyn says, guilty of this. I was so codependent in relationships before. Yeah, it's definitely been a big one that I've had to work on. So I feel you. I relate to that. Some questions that I wrote down around this is, so what happens if we don't know what to expect? Um, we've been trained to automatically assume the worst in every possible situation. And really what I've had to learn is that if the worst is possible, so is the best. And also everything in between. And so there's so many possibilities available to us when we can never be 100% sure that this is exactly what's going to happen. And if you get into, there's so many theories out there, um, but all of these possibilities could exist in different universes or different realities. And so when it really comes down to it, doesn't really matter. If all of these possibilities are available to you, what good does your expectation do? Instead of allowing you to experience it, it ends up just blocking it. Um, and so this is where your beliefs and your mindset come in. And this is building off of yesterday a little bit, because if you didn't watch yesterday, we go into beliefs and mindset a little bit more. But a lot of these control tactics or expectations that you put on yourself, they're contributed to limiting beliefs that you hold. So these things aren't just coming up to be cleared, but they're deeper rooted into past beliefs that you've held since childhood, or something that you've taken on either from a relationship or an experience that you've had. And you're just still holding them in your system. And so you're still operating from the place that this is the reality because you believe that it is. But when you go in and realize, hey, I still have this belief, you have the power to then change the belief and make the changes in your actions that support your highest good and support the way that you really desire to feel. So what surrender is really offering is freedom. And I found that to be incredible. It's an opportunity to trust. This is the trust in ourselves as well as the trust in the universe. When we're surrendering, we're trusting ourselves to survive. We're trusting ourselves to succeed. We're trusting ourselves to be able to still experience life in the way that it was meant to be experienced. And that's what it all boils down to. So this is part of building that connection with yourself and recognizing your beliefs and where you stand and how you want to feel. It's all tied back into that core connection to your inner being. We're not giving up our power or authority of our lives. What we're doing when we're surrendering is we're releasing the limits that we've put on ourselves, and we're trusting that everything can work out. Not that it has to, but the possibility is there, and that everything can be completely smooth and wonderful and exciting. So the reason that I chose these three subjects, personal connection, beliefs and mindset, and then surrendering, is because these are three of the things that I've honestly struggled the most with in my personal journey. So I really wanted to do a brief introduction on them and to just share a little bit of what I've learned with you guys. And I know I didn't talk about manifesting during this 3-day challenge, but all three of these things are the fundamental basis to manifesting, which when I discovered that, it just made so much sense. Anything that I've looked at within the spiritual community about manifesting was like a 5 to 10 step process of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to do it in this order. You can only do it this way. And it really just felt like there was a lot of work involved in manifesting, and I didn't feel like it should be that way. So when I really stepped back and observed what has occurred in my own life and how I've operated and the energies that I have felt and experienced and seen, it really doesn't have to be that way. It's really not that big of a struggle. What it really comes down to is connecting to what you really truly desire, clearing the limiting beliefs around that, and then existing as yourself. And that's like all there is to it. Which, of course, there's a little bit of work involved, but I don't think that has to be as hard as a lot of people have tried to make it. It doesn't have to be so confusing.